Start streaming. Hey guys, howdy. Good to see you from this close now. I was back there, now I'm up here. Yeah, that's right. They don't need anything out here. I'm loud enough, right? Y'all can hear me. All right. There you go. Can you hear me now? Oh, careful. Everyone at home just went, ah! Watch it. I do. I got one on. Yep. I figured I didn't really need it here because it's a small group and I'm not trying to reach anybody in the back row, even though that's what you're told to do. If you grew up in theater like me, you're told to try to hit the back row and let it bounce back to you with your words. So usually you don't have a microphone. A lot of times you don't have a microphone on stage, and so you're told to project your voice, throw it back to the back of the room so it bounces off the wall and comes back. Then you know, hey, everybody can hear you. Because some people get up there like this and you don't know what they're saying. And you have no idea what they're saying. Exactly. Exactly. So I want to welcome you guys to our first week of the new school year, the new fall semester. And the next 5 weeks we're going to go through a little bit of Ephesians chapter 4. Not all of it, because I only have 5 weeks. It would take me a little bit longer than that. But if you want to, go ahead and start open to Ephesians chapter 4. But before we get started, I wanted to, you probably see it already on your outline. I'm going to go through a couple questions. So this is the title, the theme of this 5 weeks is going to be Life Worth Living. So first, I wanted to ask you this question. What attributes are included in a life worth living? And I left you just one blank, so just write a few down. A characteristic, maybe, something that you would apply to or say, hey, that's part of a life that's worth living, if you saw that somebody else had it. What would be included? You could almost just get rid of the word attributes. What is included in a life that's worth living? That does the same thing. So once you write a few down, I want to hear some answers. Anybody? Honesty. Honesty, that's a good one. Humility. Christ is something good in a life worth living. A love for God. Purpose. Faith. This is really good. Selfless. Someone who's selfless. That would be good. Eternal perspective. So looking out on the grand scheme of things, not day by day, but where is this going to get me in the span of eternity? Love. That's a good one. So the next question I have for you is the opposite of that. What attributes are included in a life that's worth avoiding? You go ahead and write them down first. You shooting the gun right there. But selfishness is great. That's a good one. Greed. There you go. Fear. Very good. The Lord has not given a spirit of fear. Evelyn. That would be something in life worth living. I would say the devil would be something that's in a life worth avoiding, right? That'd be the opposite. Or any of the demons. Any sin, right? Yeah, we kind of named a few specific, and Leroy went for the whole umbrella. He said sin. Put it all together. Throw it all together. So now that you guys are open to your Bibles in Ephesians chapter 4, let's start in verse 17 through 19, and let's read a little bit of what the Apostle Paul has to say here. It says this, "So this I say, and affirm together with the Lord, that you walk no longer just as the Gentiles also walk, in the futility of their mind, being darkened in their understanding, excluded from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their heart. And they, having become callous, have given themselves over to sensuality for the practice of every kind of impurity with greediness." It's a pretty hefty verse right there, right? You say, Jacob, we're talking about a life worth living. Why are you talking about all this bad stuff? Well, here's what I want to say. Before we go into any of that, I want to go through just a little bit of that verse. So, hey, Tammy, can you put the first verse back up there? We're going to go through all of these points here tonight, but I want to start out with the first sentence. "So this I say, and affirm together with the Lord, that you walk no longer just as the Gentiles also walk." Here is making a declarative statement, and he's wrapping up everything he's spoken about from chapter 4 in the beginning about Christians living united with one another. This section here begins to dive into Christian living, which is what we're going to be talking about for the next 5 weeks. An important note is that while this 5-week course will cover Ephesians 4:17 all the way through 32, more on Christian living actually continues through the end of this letter in Ephesians 5 and 6. So after this, or tonight even, you guys could go and read the rest of that, or you could jump ahead and study up for next week. The next part of that sentence, and affirm together, wait, go back, still on the first one. And affirm together with the Lord. So Paul is speaking, he says, "This I say, and I affirm together with the Lord." This statement has two implications. First, Paul is speaking as with authority from the Lord. In other words, this is not merely Paul's speak, but also God's. Second, Paul is affirming, meaning that the Lord has also said the same thing before. So not only is Paul speaking on authority from the Lord, but he is affirming what the Lord has already said. And we'll see that in just a second. That you no longer walk just as the Gentiles. The word Gentiles here, the Greek word is ethne, which is where we get our English ethnicity. This really means a race or a nation that's distinct from the nation of Israel. So he is telling them here, do not walk as the common folk, the non-believing people living in Ephesus at that time. And those other verses I was going to tell you about when Paul is talking about affirming with the Lord, Matthew 6, verse 7 and 16. Does anybody want to pull up one of those real quick? Let's just do Matthew 6, 7 before we move on. I realize I don't have it up here, but if someone wants to read it out loud.
When you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words.
So there you go. When you pray, do not keep babbling on like the pagans. That's another translation of the word Gentiles, ethne, like the people of the world, the unsaved, who just think they're going to, oh, I'm getting a no. What's the no? No streaming. What happened? Interesting. Well, let's check and see if that's actually happening. If anything, we can start it and start back over, but I'm just going to keep going. Yeah, it says live stream offline. I wonder if our internet went down. Are we recording this separately, Ken? Yes. Okay, so we'll keep going, and we'll just upload it later. Just let it keep going, and if the internet comes back on, I'm wondering if that's what happened. But if you want to hit stop and start again, okay. This I say, affirm together with the Lord, that you walk no longer just as the Gentiles. This is where I want to begin our conversation today. So in order to get the full of Christian living, first we're going to look at what not to do. Okay? So I have another question for you, and you see that on your outline. Why is it so important to not walk just as the Gentiles? I believe Paul's answer in Ephesians is very deep. He's got a very deep answer here in Ephesians 4. So we're going to break down the 5 basic characteristics of an unbeliever. And you will fill these in as we go. And I've left some room for some stuff. You know, usually these outlines are so thick of information and stuff. I wanted you guys to write down what you wanted. So here we go. Go back to our verse, our chief verse. So this I say, and affirm together with the Lord, that you walk no longer just as the Gentiles walk. Here's number 1, in the futility of their mind. Go ahead and punch down. I got a line coming in. The futility of their mind. So characteristic number 1, I've called it intellectually unproductive. These people of the world are intellectually unproductive. And the Greek word here for the futility of their mind is talking about vanity and emptiness. The unbelievers aim for intellectual genius, but they always come up short because of the lack of knowledge of God. They are well versed in philosophies and facts and theories of this world, but they are ultimately empty-headed because they have failed to recognize the one who gave them the ability to formulate thought and speech. Not that intellect is bad. I mean, we got a couple smart people in here, like Brother Ernie. Or that being smart should be taken for granted, but without a firm knowledge of God and His Word, it is effectually useless. The book of Ecclesiastes almost exclusively speaks of these things, all vanity, of things being in vain. In fact, the English word vanity appears 26 times in the NASB version of the Bible, 16 of which appear in the book of Ecclesiastes. Solomon had a pretty great grasp on wisdom, and some herald him the wisest man in the world. He says here in Ecclesiastes 1, this is 12 through 14. This says 24 on your outline. You can just scratch that out and say 14. 1, 12 through 14. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem, and I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under heaven. It is a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. I have seen all the works which have been done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after the wind. Solomon used his position to thoroughly investigate all matters of life and found it all to be completely and utterly useless. So here, I'm going to put this image up on the screen. It would not be fun to be in that situation, would it? Can you guys see that? A plane, it looks like an engine failed while you're in the sky. So I have a little story. This is a joke we used to tell in elementary school, and this perfectly sums up this point here of the futility of the mind. There's a plane, and on the plane, it's not that big, obviously. It's only carrying 4 people. The pilot himself, there's a schoolboy, his grandfather, and the man claiming to be the smartest man in the whole world. Well, something like this happens. The engine begins to fail. And so the pilot quickly jumps out and says, I've got a wife and kids at home. He grabs a parachute and jumps off. So then the other 3 are looking at each other, and the guy who claims to be the smartest man in the world says, I am the smartest man in the world. I cannot die. He grabs a parachute and jumps off. So the schoolboy and the grandfather look at each other and look down, and behold, there's only 1 parachute left. And so the grandfather says, listen, son, I've lived my life. I've been around the block. I've done everything. I've seen everything. I've lived. You're young. You're just beginning your life. Why don't you take this parachute? And the little boy says, oh, no, it's okay, Grandpa. The guy who claimed he was the smartest guy in the world jumped off with my backpack. The unbeliever is futile in mind. We must not walk like them. Next, we're going back to our verse, Ephesians chapter 4. We're in verse 18 now. The unbelievers are also darkened in their understanding, excluded from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their hearts. So this next part is darkened in their understanding. And this characteristic, number 2, I call it factually blind. Unbelievers are factually blind. And the darkened in their understanding translates to produce a condition of moral, spiritual obscurity or blindness. This characteristic is a direct result of number 1. Because their minds were unable to grasp the knowledge of God, their understanding as a whole became darkened. It's obvious that since God is light, or God is the light, this distinction is used to show the opposite. As believers, our understanding has been enlightened and continues to be as long as we keep seeking God and diving into His Word. But unbelievers are in a position of spiritual blindness and cannot ascertain things of the spiritual realm. Paul has dealt with this issue before in his writings. In 1 Corinthians, which was written 5 to 7 years prior to Ephesians, Paul told the church at Corinth to expect an irreconcilable problem when dealing with unbelievers. He says this, but a natural man, that would be an unbeliever, somebody who is of the carnal, of the world, does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him, and he cannot understand them, because they are spiritually appraised. An unsaved, unregenerate person cannot understand the things of God, no matter how smart they may be. Again, a reference to number 1. They think they know it all. They really don't. Therefore, their understanding is darkened. Now, I'm going to put another picture up on the screen. Can you guys tell me what this is? Pretty obvious, right? The most famous painting in the entire world. I'm pretty sure there is nobody I have ever met that doesn't know the Mona Lisa. It's been on display in the Louvre since 1797. It's a long time. That's like shortly after America became a country. That's how long it's been there. The last evaluation done on her worth was in 1962, and they estimated it to be $100 million US. That was in 1962. Taking into account inflation alone, not even another evaluation, but just inflation, the painting would be worth around $850 million today. Now imagine you're an art appraiser and you're trying to appraise such a wonderful piece of artwork and you're blind. That wouldn't do any good, right? Blindness is no laughing matter. But imagine walking into the Louvre as a paint assessor and not having the ability to see. Wouldn't that be utter nonsense, right? This is the same point Paul is making here in Ephesians 4. The unbeliever is blind to the truths of God. We must not walk like them. Let's go back to our verse. Being darkened in their understanding, these people are excluded from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them because of the hardness of their heart. So characteristic number 3 now is they are spiritually separated. And the word excluded in the Greek is to alienate or to estrange. Many of you guys have heard of an estranged marriage, right? Where they become no longer cordial and they can't even talk to each other. Because of their unregenerate state, unbelievers are alienated from a life of righteousness in this life, a life of abundant eternity in the next, and they're alienated from God, who is the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. This exclusion has 2 roots, which we saw in the verse, because of the ignorance that is in them and because of the hardness of their heart. The unbeliever's futile mind, from point number 1, is ignorant of the things of God and is therefore blind from understanding, from point number 2. This is one reason for the exclusion from the life of God, but perhaps the second is more devastating. The unbeliever has a stone-cold heart, as you and I once did, turned away from God and closed off to his calling on their lives. The Spirit works in such a way to soften these hard hearts, but the unbeliever who has believed there is no God has closed off the rest of his being to him. Psalm 14 and Psalm 53 are basically the exact same scriptures. If you guys know anything about the Bible, they are like looking in a mirror at each other. Except for a few words being off, they are exactly the same. They're both written by David, and the messages here are clear. This is from Psalm 14. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have committed abominable deeds. There is no one who does good. The Lord has looked down from heaven upon the sons of men to see if there are any who understand, who seek after God. They have all turned aside. Together they have become corrupt. There is no one who does good, not even one. This sums up where we've come so far. The fool, who is an unbeliever, has determined by their futile mind that there is no God, so naturally their understanding has become darkened, and they're excluded from the life of God. But one step beyond this is that there is no one who does good. Not only are unbelievers separated eternally from God, they are unable to do any good. Because God is not in them, they themselves are unable to produce any good thing. I have another illustration here. Does anybody know who this is? This is just a drawing. I'm sure it's not a real person. Any clue? We got it over here. This is Midas. Anybody ever heard the story of Midas? That's why I guess, I don't know what that is. It's some kind of, it looks like an apple or a pear. It's gold. Everything he touched turned to gold, right? It's an old Greek mythology. He stumbled upon, there was a runaway, and he found and brought it back. And Dionysus actually gave him the ability to turn stuff gold, but he almost died because everything he touched turned to gold. He couldn't eat anything. So he tried to eat, and he couldn't eat because everything he touched turned to gold. So he went back and pleaded for it to go back to normal. And he was told to wash off in this river, and there's actually, people say that there's gold flakes all in the river even today. There's still gold, and that's why this is happening. But the unbelievers are just like King Midas. Everything they touch is blemished with sin. Nothing they can do is any good because the unbeliever is excluded from the life of God. We must not walk like them. Next, this is verse 19 now, Ephesians 4:19. And they, we're still speaking of these unbelievers, having become callous, have given themselves over to sensuality for the practice of every kind of impurity with greediness. So this first one, I want to talk about having become callous. I call this characteristic number 4, they are morally insensitive. Morally insensitive. The word callous in the Greek means to cease to feel pain for, moving beyond the capacity of feeling. This is a direct result of the hardness of their heart from verse 18. The unbeliever is completely turned off to be able to feel the shame or the guilt of sin. For most, it no longer affects their way of living. They have become numb to the guilty feelings that accompany sin. Rich Thompson, some of you guys may know who that is. He's a biblical counseling expert. He's from the Alief area. He's from around here. And he teaches this aspect in his book, Biblical Framework Counseling. Oftentimes, we as believers experience shame, anxiety, stress, or anything like that comes from a feeling of guilt over something we did or over the fear of being found out about something that we did. These feelings stem from a lack of love from God and a lack of love for other people. But the unbeliever actually has the capacity to turn off these feelings and suppress them. So when you ask yourself, how can somebody do something like this? You know, you've seen the examples. You've seen it happen in your own life. How can somebody do something so evil? How can they be so vile without feeling bad about it? It's because they have neutralized the ability to feel guilt. This is how so many people who can know the truth live in sin anyway. Their inability to repent has aided the suppression of guilt and shame. This is why these people are described as callous. They are beyond the point of being able to feel. They have essentially shut off their conscience. As you can see, the futile mind leads to a darkened understanding, which leads to an exclusion from the life of God. Paul speaks about some of the callousness in his first letter to Timothy as well. In chapter 4, Paul states this: "But the Spirit explicitly states that in later times some will fall away from the faith, paying attention to deceitful spirits and doctrines of demons, by means of the hypocrisy of liars, seared in their own conscience as with a branding iron." This searing with a branding iron is a term congruent with modern cauterization. The idea is, in this specific verse, is that false teachers can teach their lies because their consciences have been desensitized, as if all the nerve endings in their mind have been burned off and they could no longer feel. Callous people are the same way, no matter whether or not they teach. They are numb to their own guilt triggers. So I have another example for this point. Those are my fingers. You probably can't see them very well, but they look a little bit worse right now because I've just played. They are all calloused up. I tried to make it as big as I could because I didn't want to walk around and show you guys my fingers. But I have absolutely no feeling in the tips of any of my 4 fingers on my left hand from playing guitar for all these years. And I spared you guys from doing this. I was going to bring like a clothespin and stick it through each one of my fingers just to show you that it doesn't hurt and I can't feel it. But I didn't do that. I didn't put a picture of it either. Yeah, you're welcome for not doing that. I thought, I was like, I probably shouldn't do that kind of thing in church. But it's just the fact of sticking needles, and some people don't like that, Chance. But the unbeliever is just like this. The unbeliever is callous. We must not walk like them. By now, you're probably thinking, wow, this is really depressing. Just hold on, I promise. Let's go back to our verse. This is the last characteristic here. "And they, having become callous, have given themselves over to sensuality for the practice of every kind of impurity with greediness." So, this is characteristic number 5, and I've called it behaviorally depraved. The unbelievers are behaviorally depraved. They have given themselves over to sensuality. This word in the Greek has a whole bunch of definitions. One of them, I like it best, is conduct that is shocking to public decency. Interesting. Conduct that is shocking to public decency. This means that unbelievers have surrendered themselves to a life without concern for personal standards. They unknowingly are filled with idols, and their sole purpose is to glorify themselves. indulging in self-gratification without regard for others. Note that this submission to the world and its workings is voluntary. They have given themselves over. Nobody forces anyone else to do evil or to turn from God. That decision comes from within the heart of each individual. All unbelievers want is to further themselves and their own agenda. And the greediness that accompanies says that they will do whatever it takes to get what they want. See, in the verse, it says they've given themselves over to sensuality for the practice of every kind of impurity with greediness. And now the sequence is complete. The futile-minded people have a darkened understanding and thus are excluded from the life of God. This exclusion produces callousness, which leads to surrendering themselves to the dark side, as I call it. In Romans 1, this is a very long verse I'm about to put up. Romans 1:24, a brief outline of what the unbeliever indulges in is given by Paul. Therefore, God gave them over. Now, let me stop here and don't let me confuse you, because you say, wait, Jacob, you just said they've given themselves over. Now it says God gave them over. They themselves had the ability to choose which way they wanted to go, honor God or not honor God. So in response, God didn't just do nothing. God abandoned them to the lifestyle that they chose. He withdrew his restraint and allowed the natural consequences of their sin to ruin them. He didn't just do nothing, he did something. That is what it means when it gave them over. That Greek word translated into English as gave them over is literally abandoned. So God gave them over in the lusts of their hearts to impurity so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason, God gave them over. Once again, he abandoned them to their degrading passions. For their women exchanged the natural function for that which is unnatural. And in the same way, also the men abandoned the natural function of the woman and burned in their desire toward one another, men with men committing indecent acts and receiving in their own persons the due penalty of their error. If anybody has a question of whether or not homosexuality is a sin, that's a pretty clear verse right there. And just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God once again gave them over to a deprived mind to do those things which are not proper, being filled with all unrighteousness, wickedness, greed, evil, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving, unmerciful. If you got all those written down on your what attributes are included in a life that's worth avoiding, 10 points to you. And this is the saddest part of the whole verse, guys. And although they know the ordinance of God, they know the ordinance of God. Although they know it, that those who practice such things are worthy of death, look at this. They not only do the same, they not only indulge in this, but they also give hearty approval to those who practice them. Not only do these people engage in all of this sinful behavior, but they praise others who do. Hearty approval. They are behind it. It's not just a stamp of approval. It's a signature. It's a delivering a speech. It's a, I'm standing with you here, brother. It's a very harrowing thought to think. And we run into these people all day long. But we'll get to the point in a second. I got one more illustration here. So I'm about to be a parent. And some of you guys have already gone through this stage. Go ahead and put the first one up, Tammy. Does that look familiar? Anybody? Yeah? Well, I think that's one of the kids, and the mom is like, get me out of here. Go ahead and put the next one up. Look at that. Kid's throwing a temper tantrum on the couch, and mom is saying, oh, please, Lord, rescue me out of this. And she can vouch for this. I don't think this was me, but this might be me. In the middle of the store, in the middle of the aisle, falling down, screaming and crying for any reason. Oh, goodness. Don't get me started. So, I heard someone say this once, and it might have actually been your brother when he came and preached, Pastor Derek Berry. I did not have to teach my kids to be bad. They were born that way. I have to teach them manners. I have to teach them to tell the truth. I have to teach them virtues. They were born to do this. Why? Because we are all born into sin. We are all born of the flesh. We are all born like the unregenerate, the unbeliever. The unbeliever's heart, as sad as it is to say this, never grows out of this. As long as they exist in this life not believing in the Lord, the inner workings of their heart look just like this little boy all the time. We must not walk like them. So I have a question for you. What does this mean for me? Jacob, why are you telling me this? You may ask yourself this question, and you may tell me, hey, look, I'm here. I'm at church. I'm a believer. I follow God. I try to live right. I read my Bible. I do my devotions. I hang out with other Christians. Yes, that's all true. But think about it. Paul is writing this message to believers. He's writing this letter to the church at Ephesus, not to the unbelievers at Ephesus, saying, don't live like this anymore. He's talking to us, to the church, saying, don't live like this anymore. He would not tell us something that's meaningless. Because we have been saved, purchased, redeemed, restored, reunited, rectified, made righteous, we should not continue to live like everyone else. And now when you hear somebody say, oh, he's living like the world, now you know what that means. Take this sheet with you when you go home and say, wow, this is unbelievable. In 1 John 2, it says this. Tammy had to run to the trash can. The one who says he abides in him, Jesus, ought himself to walk in the same manner as he walked. We have no business walking around looking like people of the world. Just for a second, I want you to indulge me for a second. You don't have to raise your hands, but I want you to look inside, okay? When you look at your friends, when you look at your colleagues, when you look at your family, when you look at people you run into on a normal basis, are you noticeably different from everyone else? Sure, there are some in those groups that are believers and likewise should also be different. You guys should look the same. But look inward for a minute. Do we still walk like those that have no regard for good? Do we act unbecomingly from time to time? Do we do things in our lives that are not worth doing? I'm sure each of us can answer in the affirmative. Yeah. For me, one thing I think is my mindset when interacting with people that I would call friends, I would consider my friends, who are not believers. It's not that I throw all my values out the window or even become a different person, but there is a temptation just to be a little loose, you know? Because you walk in the room and all of a sudden, oh, there's Jacob, and he works at a church, and we have to act differently now. And then I say, no, guys, it's cool. Do what you were doing. I'm not going to sit down and drink with you guys. I probably wouldn't even be somewhere where that's happening, but I'm not going to, you let a couple cuss words fly. I'm not going to jump out at you down your throat because you're an unbeliever. I know you're not like me. You're not going to act like a Christian. I get it. Is that a bad thing? This segues into my second point, my last point tonight. And I have this question down here. How do I conduct myself around unbelievers? Because you say, yeah, I've got friends that are unbelievers, but should you interact with them at all? For some, it seems easy to just tune out things of this world and forget that anyone other than Christians even exist. But what does that mean for the Great Commission? You can't evangelize if you pretend like unbelievers don't exist and all you do is hang out in your little bubble with other believers. How can I spread the gospel to the ends of the earth if I'm unwilling to communicate with unbelievers? At the same time, catch this, How do I get their attention, which is really hard with the message we have, without doing the things they want me to do? Right? How do I cross the divide without falling into the traps of the enemy? If anyone had all the answers, there would not be any more questions, right? We must be willing to traverse the rugged terrain. We have to be willing to go out and fight the battle for souls. We have to be willing. The Lord wins souls. Let me be perfectly clear. We do almost nothing when it comes to evangelizing. It is the work of the Spirit upon the person's heart to get them to turn to God. We are the vessels. We are simply here spreading his message. God does all the work. That's one of my biggest pet peeves, and God bless them. I love our kids. Our youth are wonderful, but every year, it never fails on mission trip, that someone gets up there and says, I saved that little kid. Like, sweetheart, your heart's in the right place, but you did not save that kid, right? The Lord saved them. We are an important part, but we are not the part. It is God who does the saving. It is God who does the regenerating, the reunifying, the rectifying. We are just simply his vessels. We have the freedom to get creative in our efforts, how we go about spreading the gospel. But one thing is for sure, nothing we do must be sinful or can cause another one to sin. Nothing we can do. And no matter what we do, whether or not we're evangelizing or we're just living our lives, no matter what we are doing, our lives should never be comparable to that we have discussed today. Our lives should never be intellectually unproductive. Our lives should never be factually blind or spiritually separated or morally insensitive or, like the little kids, behaviorally depraved. So that begs the question, what should our lives look like? What is a life worth living? What exactly is a part of that? What attributes involve a life worth living? Well, I'm glad I asked that, self. The rest of Ephesians 4 is what we will be covering the next 4 weeks. So we made it through 17, 18, 19. Next week we will start at verse 20, and we'll work our way down little by little. But over the next 4 weeks, we are going to answer this question. What exactly entails a life worth living? And I know you guys are sitting there like, oh man, this is so depressing. I can't believe we did this. But I think about it like any good worker, Leroy can attest to this. Before you put in anything new, you have to tear out the old, right? It does not make sense. Some people do it, I don't know why, to put another floor on top of a floor on top of a floor. It doesn't make sense when you need new insulation to leave all the crap in there and put new insulation on top. You rip all the old stuff out. So, again, this is just an introduction, but I wanted to make it perfectly clear to have an example to look at of, hey, let me line myself up. So maybe this week, this is what we do. We line ourselves up with what we have just learned tonight. And if we have categories that we check off on the other side, that's something we can start looking at to rectify that situation. That, oh man, you know what? If somebody looked at me, they would not know that I'm a Christian because of what I watch, because of what I listen to, because of the places I go after work, because of how I choose to spend my free time, because of the kind of people I have around me all the time. And some of those may be true for you. All of those may be true for somebody. I'm not sure. Maybe somebody at home is sitting there right now like, man, he's talking right to me, if the shoe fits. There you go. But I wanted to make it perfectly clear and have a visual guide of what we are not supposed to do. Because it's really easy to say, oh, well, I'm supposed to be living good, but, you know, Pastor Frank never talks about this thing. He didn't say whether or not this was good. I'm sure it says something in the Bible. I'm too lazy to look. Well, now you don't have any excuses because you heard it. Sorry. But we are going to spend the next 4 weeks looking at the rest of Ephesians 4, discovering what is in a life worth living. All right? Questions, comments, concerns? Anybody, anything, any range? Jeff,
yeah.
You're looking at me. I know it.
What do you think about someone who's walked with the Lord but
there's always a way to come back from it. What do you mean, though, with your question? I want you to explain a little more.
We always have the security of the believer in mind.
Mm-hmm.
We say nothing can snatch you from his hand, but can people turn in their own heart and decide, I don't want to walk with him any longer, and they do what it says in Timothy, fall away, and because they choose to not walk with him any longer.
So, no, it's okay. I will give you, again, I'm right now detaching myself from the rest of this ministry. This is Jacob Burkholder's point of view. But it actually lines up pretty well with what we as a church believe. I believe once you are saved, you are sealed. And you are right. Nothing can snatch you out of God's hand. Now, let's say somebody, by their own will, willingly decides to walk away. I'm done with this. I'm out. I've had enough. These people are hypocrites. I hate God. Nothing's going right in my life. I'm going to go do my own thing. And they walk away. They're going to be kicking and screaming, but God is dragging them into heaven. And you're like, what? How can that be? Because if the original belief was sincere, there is nothing that person can do that can undo the work of God. There is nothing I can do as a person that can undo any work of God. I can't undo the cross. I can't undo the resurrection. I can't undo your salvation, and I certainly can't undo my salvation if I really am saved. Now, if I choose to walk away and I'm still saved, well, that just looks really depressing for when I get to heaven. Yeah, there's going to be no more sorrow, no more weeping, no more sin and stuff, but everybody else has got 10,000 crowns to throw before the Lord, and I'm sitting here kicking dust, bowing before him. And now I'm loving it because I'm in the presence of the Lord and I have of one mind and I am only committed to him. But imagine that scene where everyone else is giving all they have. Lord, we love you. Thank you so much. We praise you. And I'm just doing it empty-handed. It's kind of sad. But at the same time, they're saved. So, it's one of those like in between. And that is my view on this. That is my understanding on somebody who's saved.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all along. Okay? And that's why Peter writes, to check up on yourself and see if you're really in the faith.
Yep.
See if you're increasing these various qualities.
So some of you may remember last summer, I think, I did a 5-week series on the co-products of salvation, right? There were 33 things that I talked about, and I don't know if we recorded those or not. But anybody who wants the material, I can give it to you. Anyways, I went through 5 weeks, 33 things that accompany a believer with salvation. And so we broke down 7 or 8 of them each week. Well, the goal with that, and I said it at the end of every single meeting, was that sometimes we doubt our own salvation. Again, not that we're not secured, not that we're not already going to heaven, but sometimes we do that inward check and we think, oh boy, I'm really not sure. And so by looking at all of the things that accompany salvation, you begin to see, is this in my life? Is this in my life? All these things happened instantaneously when I became saved. Are these things checking out? If not, I need to check my own heart. And one thing I would add to that would be that it's got to be a self-examination. It does no good for one believer to look at someone else who may be struggling and say, I don't know if they were ever really saved. Well, I don't know if they were ever really regenerated or not. Yeah.
Is he going to turn to the world for answers, or he's going to turn to God's Holy Spirit?
But, brother, do you and I not do the same thing sometimes? We do. So, again, a pattern of sin is different, and sometimes a brother or a sister need help getting out of that pattern. And sometimes it's just a one-off thing that we do that we say, oh, man, I'm dealing with something, I'm going to go turn to the world. And then we say, oh, no, I shouldn't have done that, And then we have that whole process of the guilt and the shame, and we get back in it, and we repent, we turn the other way, Lord forgives us, boom, we're back in it. You know what I mean? Chance, you were going to say something.
All right. So you said that you turn away from your faith, you still can go to heaven, but that
it was just
that you just read, it said that God abandoned them to their worldly desires.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that contradictory to what you said?
No, those people were never believers. Correct. Those people were born in an unregenerate state, had the choice, chose the world. God said, have at it, guys. Have a ball. Have all the cake and eat it too. All right?
What about the parable of the sower? What do you think about that?
Exactly.
Are they Christians? The ones that got choked out by the world, and the ones that the scorching sun and the pressure got to them and they didn't grow.
Mm,
Maybe they were just on the fence, but
right.
the 30, 60, and 100-fold are the only real believers.
Are they only real believers? That's the thing. You have to, because it's easy to take one verse like that and put that. A lot of people also go to Hebrews 6. A lot of people say, oh, Hebrews 6 is talking about people losing their faith. But it's real easy to do that and to look at one verse and not to take into account the entirety of the Bible. Nowhere in the whole rest of the Word does it talk about anybody losing their salvation. Plenty of ways it talks about people turning away from God, walking in the light and turning away. And we have examples of that in our own lives. I'm sure we all know somebody who we are convinced was a believer who are now not walking with the Lord. Now, are we the ones to judge the heart? No. We only can see the outward actions and encourage them to get back on the right track. But only God can judge the heart. Adiola.
There's some strong statements too in Romans, especially Romans 10, where he's talking about being arrogant, thinking, well, I'm grafted in and I can't be broken off.
Mm-hmm.
Some people kind of worry about that. Well, what if those people are so depraved, even though they were grafted in, they're going to be broken off again?
Yeah.
So that kind of makes you think about that.
And there's always something to be said about having a human element to something that's perfect, because we are, in a way, our flesh is still depraved. It doesn't go with us to the next life. It is stained by sin. It will stay here. We're in these bodies. And our spirit, if we have been faithful in our utterance of, yes, Lord, I believe in you, all of that kind of stuff, is perfect. Now, when you say, in Romans 10, that I'm trying to say my words very carefully here because I don't want to say something and be like, well, no, that's not what I said. So let's look at it, if you don't mind. Adiola, we'll get to you in just a minute. We're running right there. We're almost there. If you have another question, I would suggest texting Frank because I don't think we'll have time to get to them all. Let me get there. Is it not Romans 10? I don't know it off the top of my head either.
It's the thing about the Jews are boasting in Jewishness, and then it's like the non-Jewish person becomes a believer, and he's talking about they were grafted into the people of God by faith in Christ, and that they shouldn't be arrogant toward the people who God had called to be a people originally because of their hardness of heart and unbelief. They're broken off and you're grafted in, but don't be arrogant toward them lest you be broken off too. It's kind of like, maybe it's 11. It's a way to really to remind us to have the fear of the Lord. Not that we have to be broken off, but we should respect Him and not be arrogant toward anyone else as far as
Romans 11 to 17.
Oh, here we go. I was catching up. Skimming through 15, 16, 17. But if some branches were broken off, and you, being a wild olive, were grafted in among them and became partaker with them of the rich root of the olive tree, do not be arrogant toward the branches. But if you are arrogant, remember that it is not you who supports the root, but the root supports you. You will say then, branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. Quite right, they were broken off for their unbelief. But you stand by your faith. Do not be conceited, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, He will not spare you either. Behold then the kindness and severity of God. To those who fell, severity, but to you, God's kindness. If you continue in His kindness, otherwise you also will be cut off. And they also, if they do not continue in their unbelief, will be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. For if you were cut off from what is by nature a wild olive tree, and were grafted contrary to nature into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these who are the natural branches be grafted into their own olive tree? This is a very heavy, heavy verse. So, yeah. in verse 20, the branches that were broken off due to their unbelief, the branches were broken off and others were grafted in solely based on the issue of faith. This is basically nothing to do with the ethnicity, the race, anything else like that. Salvation is always by faith alone, regardless. So when those who were unbelievers were cut off and decide, oh, now I want to believe, but it's sincere, all the more that they'll be grafted in.
I don't think it's meant to make us worry that, oh no, I might be broken off, but it's make us thankful that we're grafted in.
Yeah.
Not be arrogant toward someone else who we think, oh, they're not in on Jesus, so they're broken off.
Right.
We wouldn't have that attitude anyway, but I think it's sort of an admonition.
Yeah. And some may that have been depraved their entire lives and never known anything else. And that's why this example is here. That have never known love, that have never known appreciation, satisfaction, anything like that, are told now that they get to go to heaven, and they're like, ha ha, you losers, you don't get to go in. Yeah, that's an unbecoming attitude in any situation. Adiola, what were you going to say? No, come on. You sure? Mm-hmm.
And then Christ comes. God is the judge of our hearts. So I'm not going to go into it so much. He answers to God. But am I going to tell somebody and say that Christ comes at that point because he gave his life to Christ 10 years ago, then it means it's fine? I mean, I won't mess with that. I just want to go to heaven and I'm going to stay on the right track. But I won't tell somebody who falls from the faith and says, oh, your salvation of 20 years ago is going to save you. That's just.
Yeah, I wouldn't tell somebody that either. I would say what I've been saying, that God is the judge of your heart. And if you don't know the contents of your own heart, you need to start looking, because the Lord is coming. And your time might be up sooner than you think, you know. And that's another thing, you know, kind of with the don't act unbecomingly, don't act all up and about it, you know, when you have what other people don't. Our time is fleeting and our time is short. And sometimes we don't really think that until one of our close friends passes away. And we're like, oh my gosh, I grew up with that person. I know that person. That person, you know, or a mother or a father or a loved one of some kind. Then we realize, oh man, we really are not here for a very long time. And so, yeah, I wouldn't, to what Adiola and what Chance said, if somebody, you know, does walk away from the faith and says, forget it, I'm out of here, this is nothing for me, I am no one to sit there and say whether or not that person's going to heaven. And I would never attempt to. But what I can say to anybody, them or anyone else, is if it was sincere at any point in your life, at any point, if you had a sincere confession in your heart that Jesus is Lord, then you're going to heaven. Because I firmly believe that what the work of the Spirit cannot be undone by man. And I believe I can back that up scripturally. And other people will debate me, and you can find all kinds of debates about it too. There's people who teach the Bible and love the same God we do and believe that you can lose your salvation. And that's just something we disagree on. Oh, we lost our religion a long time ago, hon. Who's that?
The verse that we just read
Mm-hmm.
said we can be cut off from the olive tree. That kind of gives a little bit more to the you can lose your salvation.
But again, does the branches that were cut off ever say that they were actually saved in the first place? And then they can be grafted back in later when they believe. I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
I said that they wouldn't have been grafted on in the first place, right?
Here, let's pray real quick. I can address this.
Would you consider Paul, when he was in his ignorance and when he was living, he thought he was doing things for God and he was living that life?
Yeah.